This is a chance to just reflect on what we've learned today, but also more generally across the conference, of course. And we're interested in what you're going to have to say as well. So we've got a little while to just chew through some of the topics. I just want to set the scene again. I mentioned this at the beginning. I think it's important just to remind all of us that what our goals were for the day in the sense of what we hope that you take away. And then I'd be interested to hear what the panel think we've done in terms of achieving those goals, but also things that we can do next, so that we're not just looking backwards, but we're looking forwards. And you'll recognise some of the people on the panel as having contributed in different ways over the 2 days, and also to have something to say about leadership, which has been the particular theme that we've been following. So at the beginning of the day, I asked you to look away from WCAG, to look away from the code, to look away from the day-to-day testing and all the other stuff, and think about leadership and think about change. And I think that we've successfully shifted that focus during the day towards who we need to connect with, how we need to influence them, how that works, what sorts of change we can make, what things will impact on change. And I guess behind that is a very clear assumption on all of our parts that it's just not good enough at the moment. The world doesn't work the way that we want it to, that the organisations we're in don't do the things we want them to do. So rather than dwell on that and building a big bonfire of all the sad stories that we have, we were looking ahead and thinking about how we change stuff. I will just mention that the burnout session, I think, was just fantastic. Mm-hmm. I think because you can't do those things without recognising the huge amount of stress and strain that it'll bring to everybody who's working on it, trying to do too much at the same time. But at the same time, trying to change everything, changing those things is also a challenge. So my personal starting point is to say a huge thank you to the people who participated in that. But also, it was the Champions of Accessibility Network that said, put that on the agenda. And it's the real moment of thinking, yep, that's what life is really like. So, but I do want to come to this thing about change, because I think that, if we were sitting here in a few years' time, would we still just be looking at the same stack of stuff in our in-tray? How will we have changed the stuff in our organisations? Did we find that today we were in the wrong organisation, we needed to be in another one? Did we look around at our colleagues and pick somebody that we wanted to be mentored by or connect in with, or think about how we were going to make that change happen, and come back in a couple of years' time and think, yeah, that was because I got inspired to just try that little thing that I hadn't done before. And I think that's what we're trying to do today, is to get people to act on some of the things that we've heard. So, without further ado, Heather, you're gonna get the first go at this.
Oh, God.
If you think about what we were talking about when we talked about doing stuff, Champions of Accessibility, CAN and TechShare Pro together, how much of what we've done chimes with what you think within CAN that you see in the network, you're seeing on your meetups?
Yeah.
Is this a good time for people to go, yeah, you really need to... You need to be the leaders. That's what we were saying, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you know this about me, that TechShare Pro for me is all about the people. The chats we've had and out there, seeing people that we've only seen online in CAN sessions. It's just so nice. There's never enough time, though, Mark. We need more time to talk, please.
So it's like a week-long boot camp you're looking for.
Yeah, I think it probably needs to be. Or maybe just smaller sessions with people who can actually chat. But the burnout session, I think, said it all for me. That is what I think this amazing community is. It shows what we're all about. It's being open to the point of supporting everyone else. That was hard I don't think people found it hard, but the people on stage were telling their stories. And I just want to say a massive thank you, by the way, to the panel and to Gareth for doing an amazing job facilitating that. Standout session for me, that was, and we need to do more of that. That is our community. We're an amazing group of people here with so many similarities. We just need to connect more. You're talking about the connection thing. I was going to suggest that, as well as connecting more with the people in your organisations about what we've learned today, connect with each other more. And again, that's what CAN is about. So those who haven't been to a meetup, we talk about a theme. There's a theme, and people are invited to come and talk about that theme. But then after we talk, we have half an hour of, we call it speed dating, or, where we go into small breakout groups of 3 or 4 people for like 7 minutes or something, just quick, and people just chat. And so many lovely connections are made there. And then people who've said, oh yeah, I must catch up with you about that, when they're coming back into the main room. And they do connect. They connect, and then they go and have another conversation in their own time. That, I think, is the key. we connect with people who are doing the same thing, who have the same feelings about everything that we do, who are having the same struggles, and we can really, really help each other. I mean, that's how I got started. I talked to people. I picked some people, and thankfully most of them were happy to chat. But I think we should do that as well. Just, say half an hour a day, put it in, people come and talk to us. It's a connection thing, I think. So, we need to do more. What can we do more, Mark? We need more time.
Okay, I'll create more time for you.
Romana, we were talking about change management at the beginning of the day, and obviously you're familiar with some of these ideas about how change might happen. But from the takeaway on the day, where does the jigsaw come together for you about how people in the room are going to make change happen in their organisations?
Yeah, it's interesting. I felt like we were being told to do the hokey cokey a bit, because it's like shift left, shift right, shift down, shift up. And so then also trying to tell people not to get too overwhelmed. Yeah. So, for me, I would say if you're going to focus in any one direction this year, focus up. Because if you get that sponsor, your change will be more successful. Like research shows that on change programs. That's that for me. Equally, I think, reflecting on this topic being called accessibility leaders. And I think sometimes we can get trapped into thinking I have to be a certain level in an organisation to really lead on accessibility. But there's a distinction between a manager and a leader. A manager is a certain grade in an organisation. A leader is just anybody that influences people. So I can see here a room full of leaders. You don't need to be a certain grade. You just need to know the right people, make the right connections. So that's something I think that's important to take away. I mean, there's so many things to reflect on today, but what was your question again?
I don't know, but those are the right answers. So Marley, what are your top tips on ingratiating yourself to the upper echelons of a bank, amongst sort of one of the most difficult places I imagine in terms of gaining influence and thinking about how people can learn from some of what you've done, those sorts of things?
Yeah, really good question. Look, let me kind of just give you a sense of what I used to do, right? When the bank recognized this is something that we need to do, or I told them there was something that needed to be done, they wanted somebody who had a track record of success, a track record of transformation, a track record of delivery, right? Somebody who was credible. That guy was busy, so they asked me. I'm kidding, right? But look, I don't see myself as an accessibility professional, right? I don't. Even still, that's not how I see myself. In my last job, I was the Chief Risk and Chief Control Officer when we transformed something called HSBC Net, which does $70 trillion in payments annually, right? Just to give you a sense of size, scale of this bank. For people who've got one website, one app, I've got one website, one app, one transactional platform just for retail banking in one country, and then multiply that by 60. I've got a commercial banking business, I've got an investment banking business, I've got a private banking business. My HR function alone has 600 websites, right? And we oversee the lot, right? So scale is a pretty unique challenge. And then, of course, you've got the complexity of regulation, something as simple as switching on captions on Zoom. I went all the way to the board because we need to move our hosting instance from the US to Brussels, because the US has certain data regulation, which means that it can require data. And of course, there's tension between East and West, right? So just to give you a sense of some of the things I've done, but also a sense of the organization I work in. Influencing the top, it's really interesting. Everybody's got their own style, right? And just to be clear, we don't just kind of do top down. We do top down, middle out, bottom up. I want to influence everybody, right? My team and I are known to the security staff when they come in, right? So much so I think Alan had spoken to the receptionist and they didn't know who I was. Alan, we'll have a word with them. I don't know how that happened, right? We want to influence the whole organization. But if I want to influence people at the top, I think the first thing I do is I take real people, right? Robin, Addy, and I have probably done, without exaggeration, I don't know, 500 to 1,000 presentations over the last 5 to 6 years, right? In the last 2 weeks, who have you met? You met my Chief Operating Officer for commercial banking and investment banking for Europe. You met my chief executive officer for retail banking for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. You met my chief procurement officer, full stop, right? I'd say 10% of my time is speaking to my executive cadre, right? I've got to create the environment for my people to be able to do their job, right? And the best way to influence them is by giving them a taste of what good looks like, right? So, our website or our app, and then what bad looks like, right? And I'm sure you've got many examples, right? And I give them a very simple choice. We can continue to be good, and in certain parts of Asia, we will contrast ourselves to our competition. In certain parts of the Middle East, in certain parts of Africa, and actually in certain parts of Europe, right, until the EAA came along, right? It was very simple. Here's our offering, here's their offering. We can do everything, take a mortgage, open an account, but actually you can't even get past the homepage on the majority of our competitors, right? So if I were to give you guys a top tip in terms of how to influence a top, take in real people, whether it's your staff or your customers. There's a whole bunch of other things that I can talk to you about influencing. And look, I had the privilege of having a career coach for many years and how to read body language and, strategies for getting, buy-in. But my best advice to you is take in real people, right? And contrast them. And actually, if you haven't started your own accessibility journey, be very brave. This is our digital offering. And this is a competitors, and look at how much better they are, right? And I'll tell you what, literally of the several hundred, it might be a couple of thousand executive presentations Robbie and Addy and I have done, all of them have been a success. Not 99% of them or 98% of them, all of them have been a success. So that would be my advice to you.
Thank you. And Hector, Microsoft, it has all sorts of different touch points in terms of accessibility, and we all know Jenny, I guess, as that figurehead. How about influence within other networks that you're part of? I know you've worked quite closely with sales and other elements of which I think is really an interesting sideways move that people may not consider.
Yeah, so I'm 8 years at Microsoft now, and what does an evangelist do was the first question I had to answer, at the interview actually. But essentially, what does an accessibility evangelist do? We're massive. We're not just massive in terms of who we are as a business, but we're massive in terms of the partner networks, the customers we work with. We are in lots of different rooms around the world. And my role is to make sure that someone somewhere is having a conversation about disability inclusion or accessibility. And to do that is no mean feat. There's a baseline of training that every Microsoft employee is trained on disability and accessibility. That's happening behind me. But the question is always, well, how does that help me in my job? And what's been really interesting is, I now have about 400 people around the world who are actively putting accessibility into their regional day job, adding it to what they do. What I do is essentially I make them successful in their existing roles, both culturally and in terms of what they're trying to deliver by aligning on accessibility. So just to give you some secrets, well, not secrets, but how do we sell? We have account executives who are focused on building a strategy with the customer. We have account technology strategists who are looking across the whole industry and the technology strategies there. We have technical specialists actually going in and selling the solution. Is it Teams or is it? Did you say Zoom? What's that? Joke. I don't know. I knew it. But just so we have selling the solution, and then we have customer success people who make sure people use the solution, and then we have partners implementing. And essentially, all of these people have got a different mindset when it comes to accessibility. Some are thinking very high level. That's been my favorite learning is get in at the highest level and have a conversation about what is your disability strategy in this organization? How can we help? What can we share on? But then getting down to a usage person. Well, usage is all about making sure that you're helping people adopt our products inclusively and using, everyone's using them and you're sharing that success. So essentially the way that we've built this army of people within our sales force to go and have the conversation is by making them successful in their existing jobs. Yeah, we're not all accessibility professionals, yeah, but what that does is it pulls through the need for accessibility professionals because suddenly you're having different conversations about accessibility. So if we go in and we talk about how does somebody use Teams, from a disability accessibility perspective, the next exam question you have to answer is, well, is the SharePoint accessible? Is the learning platform accessible? Is it? And that creates the kind of the motivation to start building more accessibly. And what do you need then? You need more people to have skills in accessibility. And so what we're trying to do is drive more need for accessibility across a much wider group of stakeholders. Just quickly turning to partner. Partner's difficult. Now, I've got some partners in the room. I'm chatting to them over the break. But as much as we've worked out how to add accessibility into our commercial engagements, our partners have to now do that as well. And first thing any seller will ever ask is, well, how much will we sell? How much more will we sell? Yep. And that's where not every organization has this culture of, are we selling the product? Are we selling the brand? We've done a lot of that yesterday. Are we selling, what's the absolute ROI? And accessibility professionals all over the world are having this conversation of like, what value do we add? What's the ROI on accessibility? Well, link it to what you're building. Link it to your product. Link it to your brand. Don't just measure how many more people used something because of accessibility, because I hate to tell you, those numbers are not great. I hope I'm not giving the game away, but I wish we had amazing telemetry to say that everyone was using accessibility features all the time in the products that we build. That is not true, because knowledge and education out there is terrible. Yeah, in terms of how people use the systems. So you're not going to win the ROI argument alone, which is why I think it's so. I don't know how many times I've mentioned this week, Marley, but it's why I love this bit. This concept yesterday of an enterprise-wide strategy. That's the answer. And I've been saying this for some time. You were talking Horizon 1, 2, 3 last year. It's got to be that. If we're just saying, what ROI does this one team bring in accessibility? It's not always good news. And that just creates the stress, the tension, all those sorts of things. The leaders unlock the permission, and you just do it. You get on with it. And what I've loved, if you listened to Joanna earlier talking about the exam questions we have to answer on inclusive research, inclusive AI, nobody was saying, well, how much is this extra work going to cost? Because we'd already won that argument about, hey, we're going to make AI accessible. Yeah. So there's maybe it's a critical mass that we all have to achieve. There needs to be a critical mass in every organization about people who care about this topic. And until you reach kind of a certain proportion, it's hard and it's exhausting. And leaders and building it into kind of people's existing jobs, to me, that's the secret sauce.
Out of interest, is that what you said in the interview? I'm wondering. No, obviously that's
one day I will tell you what I said in my interview.
I knew I wasn't going to get that out of you. But no, I wonder whether how much of that you knew then and how much you've learned. Also, I'm thinking about people in the audience who are at the same point of view, stepped into the room.
Please.
I've got this job. I don't even know what it is. That's how most people feel.
I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. Everyone knows my history is working in assistive technology. I worked for tiny companies building bespoke technology, specialist technology. And then I somehow got this job at Microsoft, and they threw me in at the deep end. And we don't know how you do this, but we need to basically build a sales program, an evangelism program on accessibility. And I had to work out. And if I have one shared quality with Marley, is that people generally kind of remember what I said in the room, and then you get buy-in. And so some of my exec sponsors, I'll give you a little bit of a secret again. My exec sponsors for my accessibility program are three of the most important salespeople in Microsoft. And other people who are trying to build similar efforts, they go, "How did you get them?" And I'm like, "I asked them." Aim high. Yeah. That you said.
Thank you. Yes, I do think that's different to what other people are trying to do. When they pick somebody to aim at in the organisation, and you say, go to the top. I think that sales stuff is so persuasive to say those are the people who think that what we're doing is the right thing. It's very different to CSR, for example, which is another, or DEI. I'm not knocking those strategies, but that's the particular thing that strikes me when I talk.
DEI is a massive part of what we do.
Yeah.
Don't ignore it. DEI is a massive part of what I do, but there's a deliverable. Yeah, DEI is not just we, the accessibility professionals in this room, we're the people. I always joke. Can I tell a joke? Very quick one. I always say, we sit in this world and we all celebrate. We need to be celebrated, right? But did anyone celebrate the people who built the level access into the HSBC office, the builder? No, they just did it. Yeah, that profession now knows that's a deliverable. You don't build just stairs into public buildings. You've got to have level access. That we got there through standards, through regulations, through all those sorts of things. But also through somebody kind of going, of course you do that. if we get too linked into D&I, we don't always make the progress that we need to make. I think we've got to make sure that we are having a very specific conversation about the deliverable of accessibility and riding the wave of D&I as that fluctuates, by the way. That fluctuates.
Yeah. So, Christopher, much smaller organisation that you're dealing in rather than the scale that Hector's had to deal with for the last 8 years. How much of that rings true in Google? And in particular, I'm thinking about where you think the influence lies that you've sort of won and that is important in terms of whatever you're doing in terms of success.
I think everything we've heard is true in my experience. The way that I've been able to have any kind of influence starts with humility, just understanding that I'm not perfect, what we're doing isn't perfect, and we're going to screw up. And taking that and giving people permission to listen to you, because you don't have to come off as a know-it-all. And realizing where, to Hector's point, where the decision is. I often talk about the sandwich of influence. When you're going into an organization, you start at the bottom piece of bread, like an open-faced sandwich, and then you build up and you help people become successful, and you build up relationships, and then you find your way to the top piece of bread, and that's cool. But it's the tofurkey in the middle that you have to keep active. And tofurkey, I'm vegetarian.
What is that?
So it's really, I don't recommend it actually. But because the problem is if it gets dry, if you ignore it, it becomes hard. It becomes brittle. So what you need to do is you need to keep fresh tofurkey going into your sandwich. But the real point is that's the relationship you need to have, is that middle management, that the people who make the decision, yes, this feature, no, this, not this feature. And then you need to keep that relationship going, because people come and go throughout the organization. If you don't have the senior leadership to the point, they can say no. But you can't get to the senior leadership unless you have the trust of the environment and of the organization. So it is, as he was saying, it's up, down, side to side. It's all true. And when and I'll use an example of the ADCs that we've built. If you haven't seen, it's called Accessibility Discovery Center. It's one of the proudest things I've been part of. No, thank you. But it's about sharing the information that we have. And we just built it. We didn't ask for permission. I've got my friends here who built it with me, and we didn't ask for permission. We started off as an ERG, and we built it, and we designed it, and people came. And people continue to come. And now by the end of this month, we'll have 7 of these centers around Europe. And next year, we're going to have more. And so sometimes you just got to start walking. Trust yourself. Trust that what you're doing has meaning. Because what you were building something that changes people's lives, and who knows, it might change yours too.
I'm not going to ask anybody else whether they know what tofurkey is, but are we sending out for that now? Because you said you'd let them have whatever they wanted. Is it going to be?
Can I just jump in? Sorry, just on the levels of influence thing there. Just a very quick story. When I started at Skyscanner almost 6 years ago, I was a UX writer, so I wasn't doing accessibility. Realised that our products were really shit. And really wanted to do something about it. So I created a very crap deck. What are you doing?
I
gotcha.
Got it? And I was just asking for a little bit of budget to try and just explore a little bit of what we could do and how bad we actually were. And I created the deck and I took it to my manager. So that was a design lead. And he was like, oh yeah, great. Yeah, we've got to do accessibility. Of course. Go and speak to the next person up. So then I had to go speak to head of design, and he was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. Why are we not doing this already? And I was like, yeah. He said, go and speak to so-and-so. So then I went up another level and was like, what about this? And they said, yes, take it to the chief product officer. I think you'll like it. So then I was scared. I didn't know this guy. He was a bit scary. He's very smart. And I took it to him, and he was also like, yes, no brainer, let's do it. And I was like, right, can I go and do that for 6 months? He said, yes. I now report to him. Now, I pushed and pushed and pushed. I asked him twice if I could report to him over the years. The first time he said no. The second time he just said, oh God, you're so relentless. Okay. But he was the one who could help. He was the one who was ultimately signing off my budget requests anyway. So just be persistent, but polite. And it works.
So, Romana, we talked about it earlier, actually, a little bit about the BBC. The scale of change that you're trying to take on there, who are your allies in the sense of particular people you know are going to be, in the sense of the Chief Product Officer that Heather's mentioned? Where did you find those those first beacons to hold on to? How many doors did you knock on before you found the person who really got what you were talking about?
I mean, loads, and I'm still knocking, but I was lucky with the sponsor that really got it, and that passion then meant that I was able to open doors. But I also used other areas. I know we talked earlier about we call them staff networks, the ERG that people have been referring to, but that actually was a really helpful ally for us because each of the staff networks tends to have an exec sponsor. So you have a pathway there to an exec in a way that you possibly don't in the current structures you are. So I definitely use that too. I kept thinking about, there were different levers and you've got to jump on them. With change, we talk about a burning platform to get stuff done, right? You need something to springboard it off. I think the EAA is going to be great for a lot of people to do that with, although, I wouldn't personally want to be compliance-led with my change, but I think when you get those opportunities, you've got to go for it. A complaint that comes in, jump on it, make an example of that. Like, you've got to find your opportunities wherever you can, however small, and start using them. Make it a burning platform for that person. We had somebody tweet a social media post we did and quite publicly critiqued it, as happens for the BBC. Everyone criticises us every day. That's fine. We grow thick skin. But I used that. I immediately went to that, said we need to go speak to the social media leadership group team, show this to them, show them this is what people are saying and do something about it. Any opportunity I find, I use as my springboard.
So I'm just thinking about yesterday as well. I know not everybody was here, but we met a whole bunch of people we don't normally connect with, and there was not a coincidence, I guess, Marley, because you're in the brand space, and we chose to try and speak to marketing and advertising. So for those who weren't there, we watched ads because they're a really good way to see what good looks like. They're quite short. You can watch a lot of them. They draw you into the story. And I think that was the start of that conversation. But actually what we discovered was that brand is a good place to go and talk to people. If you can say that your organization is the most accessible coffee chain on the planet, if you can say that your organization wants to be the most accessible bank, that's a brand thing, right? It's a grand vision. And when we were reflecting on it, that's not a coincidence that that's where you're based within the bank. Is that where you would put, if you were dropping an accessibility advocate into an organization now, is that the place that you would put them? Do you think that's a great starting place for them? And also, I was thinking, because what they're good at is storytelling, right? So once they're starting to tell the story, then the story goes wider and broader. So I'm just thinking about how that plays out for you in the last few years.
And Mark, the number of times I get asked that question internally, right? It's to me personally, it's a distraction, right? I could work in brand, I could work in IT, I could work in a basement, it doesn't matter, right?
You want to change your office? Can you go change your office?
I'll stay on 41. Look, I think it really just comes down to where should you put digital accessibility? Firstly, you've got to have that storytelling, right? We did a lot of work. We are extremely conservative, right, as an organization. And the thing that we are most averse to is reputational risk. So we did the hard work first and then told the story. And then you get other brands who have done very little, if at all anything. And, they will tell, they do a lot of purple washing, right? In simple terms, we went the other way, right? And we did it slowly, right? We did it in our own way. In terms of, my advice to people around where to sit, I think you've got to figure it out for yourself in terms of your own organization, right? Now, I can't do what Heather does, right? If I were to go turn around to somebody and go, hey, I would like to report to you, there would be a political war in HSBC, right? Just as simple as, right? There would be a political war in the bank, right? Because, we're an extremely successful program. The board members I interact with regularly will kind of laugh and say, Marley, you are better known in the bank than we are. My comms teams are absolutely amazing, right? They profile the work we do because actually it is grounded in substance, right? It is grounded in fact. And we are a bank. All of this stuff gets checked multiple times before it goes out, right? So where do you sit? I think you've got to make that decision for your own organization, right? Brand perhaps maybe right for us today because actually we've got a story to tell, and we weren't telling that story because we were nervous about the reaction, right? And we made that decision deliberately at the top of the house to go, you know what, we're going to tell that story. Ramana, I know what it's like to have negativity every day, right? You work at HSBC, you know, the BBC is going to feel like a very happy place, right? So, you know, when you work for a bank in the UK, geez, you know, there was a time when I used to go out, I used to tell people I was a male nurse, right? I didn't tell people I was a banker, right? So look, I understand what it's like around, you know, negativity from a brand perspective, but I think the decision is, you know, what's right for your organization, where do you sit? And you have that answer, right? But I do agree with something that Ramana said, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Leadership isn't about grade, it's a behavior, right? You know, and of course you have to have a certain level of bravery as well. It's an attribute. You could be extremely senior and you won't be a leader, and you can be extremely junior and you can be a leader. You know, I'd take that away because I think there's some amazing leaders. You may not be senior, you may not see yourself as such, but you know, there's some great potential in this room. And look, I think the future for this community is very bright.
Cool. I'm going to skip you because Christopher put his hand up.
Yeah, just one thing to piggyback on this. I've heard this twice now. It reminds me of something that I read. The Buddha said, "You're not a Brahmin by birth. You're Brahmin by action. A farmer farms. So a manager just manages, but a leader leads and is followed. So you can be a leader without having to manage people, and in some ways, it's actually easier." Because you don't have to do reviews and those kinds of things. You inspire people to come with you. So take the initiative and walk the walk, and you'll be surprised when you have somebody that people respect, they'll follow you. Sorry.
I was going to deviate slightly in a different way. Hector, what we didn't talk about, you and I, when we were talking about what we might cover in the least 2 days, was how long ago that Super Bowl ad was. I was thinking about the comms bits of the piece that and I think you say that transformed internal perspective just as much as external.
It gave a lot of visibility to Jenny.
But can you remind everybody what that is?
Yeah,
it's a little while ago now.
Okay, yeah. It's a long time ago. I think about 9 years ago now. So it was actually about the time that Satya Nadella became the CEO of Microsoft. There was kind of a need for Microsoft to change its brand perception. So people probably back then, I wasn't there right at the time, but it was like, what was the CD you got delivered in the post? Right, and installed, right? And of course, Microsoft was changing at that point to being a platform provider, a build with platform provider. You know, we weren't in the cloud game back then. Remember? It was like, it was different. It was different, right? So there was a kind of a general need for change, and how do people perceive Microsoft? And people didn't perceive Microsoft as overly human. I mean, it was like, people all they ever talk to me about is the blue circle of death. It's like, I go to a pub, that's all they ever talk to me about, still to this day, right? So there's a need for people to kind of, like, how do you reimagine Microsoft? And Satya was, the new mission statement was there. We're going to empower every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. But what does that really mean? And like how does that present itself? And so these first Super Bowl ads, I mean, we did 3 in the end, but you can go back and you can watch all of them. They're still on YouTube. But essentially they were kind of just reimagining Microsoft as kind of a build with partner, and, ones that were doing cool human stuff, not just, this faceless tech company, if you were to think of it like that. And of course, remember, Microsoft products are what allow people to work, right? To learn, to do all these sorts of things. So we're a very human interface company, but we weren't really viewed that way. And so the Super Bowl ads were kind of I remember Chris Capsella at the time, the CMO, he was like, go big or go home. If we're going to do this, we're doing Super Bowl ads. And then we did an Xbox adaptive controller one with kids with limb difference playing Xbox games and all these sorts of things. And the response, I mean, we were talking about the results yesterday. Those results were like, Microsoft had never run a campaign like this, that really landed. famously, the Surgeon General of America retweeted it. Cher retweeted it. You know, I mean, look at how cool Microsoft are. And I've seen all the metrics, and the metrics are just ridiculous. I mean, they're just amazing. I think they're quite expensive, those ads, I heard. But it was like, look, if Microsoft's going to spend all this Super Bowl ad money, and they're talking about disability, wow, that's pretty massive. And frankly, what's happened off the back of that is just like a consistency. You know, it's like we do our ability summit every year. There's like a drumbeat of accessibility regularly. If you ever caught a Microsoft advert that wasn't accessible or a social media post that wasn't accessible, they tell us now. It's like, you know, because it's like we've driven the kind of an en masse expectation. I do want to, though, quickly talk about guerrilla marketing, internal guerrilla marketing, because in my career I've done quite a bit of that as well. I do a lot of, I don't ask permission before I'm running an internal campaign. I'm going, right? You know, there was the one I did publicly on no captions, no vote. Do you remember that one? So during one of the elections, all these politicians discovered Twitter, or X, and they were just out there putting out disgusting, inaccessible, non-captioned video, and I was just tagging them all. Hey, no captions, no vote. Get lost. Yeah, we're not interested, right? And I remember the comms person at Microsoft going, "Is this all right?" Yes. They're only politicians. They'll be gone in 3 years. But I remember actually going to Jenny at the time in the comsy, and she was like, "Hector, go for it. Like, you know, we've got so much cover here. Don't worry. Like get on with it." I remember the RNID kind of were tweeting it at the time, and we made press and all this kind of stuff. So all I'm saying is, guerrilla marketing is really cool. At the moment, we're doing the whole Copilot thing and how people are going to reimagine work. And it hasn't really shown up in our kind of initial brand marketing, because what the world kind of wants to hear about AI is it's going to make processes more efficient. It's going to make it's going to up productivity and all these sorts of things. And we're kind of looking at it and going, no. Like human experience of writing an email has just changed. Like, that's massive. The human experience of a meeting with Copilot has just changed. And so we started running these "This is my Copilot" videos. And I'll just tell you one example. We basically went to all of our ERGs, our people, and we kind of all the research on how people with disabilities are using Copilot. And one of my autistic colleagues came back to me and she went, "Hector, I never participated in meetings before Copilot." I was like, "I don't understand." Like, you know, you can put your hand up, you know, and actually that was one of the features that came from the neurodiverse community. And she went, "No, it's exhausting for me to think about what question to ask in a meeting. And I feel just like I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to bother." Now what I say is, Copilot, suggest 3 questions I can ask in the next 10 minutes. And it does it for her. And we shared that video around Microsoft, and it was like, oh my God, like this is really impactful. And now the marketing team are banging on my door to go, all right, we do 10 of these videos. We're going to put them on the website. You know, so don't be scared to do your own kind of internal impact videos, internal comms, internal selling. You know, get braver, be a bit more salesy. You know, I do think that's been a big part of what we do.
Right. You have to wake up now. I'm going to ask you some questions. Who's got something to say about this? I mean, who's been here on both days that thinks that the jigsaw's come together, is inspired? Anybody got something to say about what they've learned the most, or that we could have done differently that would show up? I'm going to start trying to warm you up and get some input from here's somebody here. Thank you.
It always takes one, doesn't it?
Yeah. You'll all be lining up now.
I'll go first. Amy hosted a great session this afternoon on digital inclusion. And it really resonated with me because, I work with a lot of people that haven't reached that magic digital front door. And there are thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people in that position. And I think it's for a variety of reasons, from affordability of the appropriate devices and technology that they need, the connectivity that they need, or just lack of person-centered support that's available out there for them to actually get. It's a massive issue that unfortunately there's no out-of-the-box solution to this, and we need to. It requires a collaborative effort by everybody in this room, I think, to kind of think about the people that haven't made it to the front door yet, and that there's a big piece of work to do on that.
Well, so I mean, I'll pick one example, Marley, because I know that this plays out. The consumer duty within a bank starts to touch into this area where people need to be able to access services. I think that's the sort of thing that I see, where it's okay you've made your website accessible. It's okay that you've got branches open and so on. But you've also got to reach a little bit further now to actually enable people to use those services. I guess that's the next step in some of those journeys. I'm just thinking about the bank and the way it works. But just to add in, I overheard, I think it was Irene saying about when we were talking about who was digitally excluded, that 80% of that is in the global south.
Yep.
So the whole setting is completely different, because we've had a lot of conversations about the planet rather than the country, lifting that sort of view. But a lot of that will be a footprint that the bank is familiar with as well, in terms of Asia and so on. So I don't know where the bank is sitting with that, but presumably that's part of the thinking of what you're doing.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting challenge to grapple with, right? And we've done some incredible work with Abilitynet, right? So, there are certain groups, the vast majority of our users who, would prefer to interact with an organization digitally, right? I think something like 93 or 96% of our transactions happen online, right? That is customer choice. We're responding to customer choice, right? And customer preference. But then there are also a very small group of people who would prefer to, do something in a different way, right? And one of the things that we did with Abilitynet, actually, and this is a beautiful partnership, is we kind of tackle two fronts. We've done this in Hong Kong as well, is we work with our partners because it's teaching people how to switch on a computer, use a tablet, right? It's that basic, right? We would pay for the tablet. We would pay for their internet or their Wi-Fi. We would rely on a partner like Abilitynet to teach them how to quite literally switch it on, connect to the Wi-Fi, use a browser, and then we would kind of teach them about sort of online banking, right? It's something we've done with a charity called the Hong Kong Blind Union. There's a sustainability angle where we've started working and taking some of our tech, and rather than kind of sticking in a landfill somewhere, we started distributing it to residents who are visually impaired. And again, we've partnered up with the Hong Kong Blind Union. The Hong Kong Blind Union would quite literally teach you how to switch on a phone. My team would teach you how to use a screen reader. And then we'd also have the banking guys kind of going, here's how to use mobile banking, right? Is it perfect? I don't believe so, because there are going to be some people. I think about my dad. He would still prefer to go into his branch because, he knows the CEO of the bank. But the CEO of the bank actually retired 15 years ago, right? Unfortunately, and, my dad's dementia has progressed, and she's like, yes, I know the CEO of the bank, and I've got to say I'm really sorry, but that guy isn't running the bank anymore, and the new guy I don't think knows who you are, Dad, right? Do we have a perfect solution? I don't think we have one yet, but this is where partnerships with organizations like Abilitynet and many others, are going to allow us to kind of learn, speak to the community, and hopefully find a solution that works for as many people as possible.
Hector?
Thank you for sharing that. To me, I'm 30 years in to this kind of this world, and that exam question's been asked for 30 years. All right, but I think the direction of travel is industry deliverables. So today through my career, you were probably dependent on meeting somebody who knew that something was available and then being referred into a specialist service somehow, and finding that knowledge and getting that information. And that was pre-mainstream really getting into the world of accessibility and assistive tech. My absolute firm prediction, and I've put it on social media so I can send you the link and say it, is that it's going to be up to industries to deliver that information. Your grocer will tell you that in the future. Your bank will tell you that in the future. Yeah, your TV company or your education platform on BBC will tell you that information. Yeah, and AI is going to make the prescription of that information much easier. So if you all go to aka.ms/askma, so Ask Microsoft Accessibility, we now have generative AI guidance on accessibility. You can ask anyone. Sorry, you can ask it, hey, I'm colorblind and I've got, a Windows 10 PC. Is there anything that's going to help me? And you can have an intelligent conversation with the AI without embarrassment or any stigma attached to it and get that answer. Now, the problem is, you're ahead of me, it's on the Microsoft website. Average Joe ain't coming to my website. Yeah, Average Joe's coming to his website. Yeah, and I
Maybe
think
ours.
Maybe YouTube. I mean, maybe YouTube. I give you that one. Or Xbox. We could say Xbox. But I genuinely believe your government service, your bank, your shop. That's going to be the future to me. That's where the guidance is going to be. Sorry,
we didn't put you on the end. Didn't put you on the end on purpose, Christopher.
Don't worry, I can hold my own clearly. Actually, if I may, coming back to the Global South, because this is real, and this is something that we're spending a lot of time doing. We've just recently been doing some interesting research where, when going into some villages, they literally don't know how to use a touch screen. They were pushing too hard, and it wasn't working. So the people, when we were doing this training, we would do paper mock-ups and teach someone how to gently scroll. So the what needs to be taught is profoundly different than what we're used to here in the North. And then there's the awareness question. Okay, now I know how to use a phone. How can I afford it? Okay, now that I can afford it, is it accessible? Once it's accessible, how about the apps that are on it? Can I use that? Can I use M-Pesa? M-Pesa is a banking app in Kenya. And frankly, it's not accessible. And we've done some really interesting research where we did with UCL and AT Scale, where we had 100 people who were hearing impaired, 100 people with visual impairments. 100% of the people with hearing impairments use M-Pesa. 25% of the people with visual impairments use M-Pesa. And here becomes the business opportunity. You can go and say, hey, this is your business chance. And then you get people excited. But first, we have to teach people that it exists, how to use it. And it's our jobs as industry to make sure that they're accessible and available and affordable. Not everyone can afford an iPhone. So a 50-pound Android device is profoundly better than nothing. Mm-hmm. And it's our job to make sure that it's a useful platform for everyone.
Yeah.
Chris, if I may, sorry, I just remembered something we did. We do a lot of things. But in Hong Kong, one of the things we did is we launched something called Project Silver. Now, if you go to, our app, you can do a whole bunch of things, right? From really simple, make a payment, to invest. But Project Silver was specifically for our elderly population, because actually, what they need is just to kind of do a day-to-day payment, check their balances, check their investments, right? And we also obviously did things like change the font size, simplicity. It was all user-led. So it was a partnership with the community, telling us what they wanted and what they did not want, right, on a day-to-day basis. It's been incredibly successful. And, what we saw through that in terms of data was actually mom and dad who wouldn't usually use anything, a smartphone app beyond a WhatsApp call. And of course, positioning it, move the camera up. Can we jump on Zoom?
No.
Teams? Nobody's heard of Teams. Just a complete distraction. Whenever I have a meeting with Hector, I tell my secretary, make sure it's on Zoom just to wind him up. Just to wind him up. Not that I don't have Teams, but, I enjoy that. But look, it's great to see organizations kind of responding to this, right? HSBC's got a couple for a specific segment of society. And look, I was in the audience talking about user research. And, I think this is what's really important, right? Whatever it is you do, partner with that specific part of your community, because however smart you are, however experienced you are, your community and the people you are here to serve know best. For example, we thought we had the accessibility of this event down pat. And I'm just going to call her Orange Juice Lady because I don't know her name. Where are you? Is she still here? Yes. Yeah, very good. And she came in a little whisper in my ear. Really good suggestion, right? The labeling on our food was really small. I was like, yeah, damn it. Who am I blaming? Chris, it's your fault, isn't it?
Progress, not perfection.
So, of course, I said to my guys, they are making sure that the label on the food this evening is going to be bigger. But I was like, fudge, we thought about everything, right? We rebuilt this stage last year for TechShare Pro, right? To make sure that, there was ramp access, right? Our entire security team is briefed on how to welcome you. And we did our absolute best, but fudge. We got the labeling on the food wrong. Thank you so much for telling me, because actually, if you hadn't told me, I was nervous yesterday that there weren't enough of those things. And I was thinking, man, if somebody's got a food allergy, I'm really nervous here, right? But actually, I didn't think about the size of the font, right? So my advice would be speak to your community. They know best. And you will get the answers right together.
So I'm going to wrap us up very briefly. Romana and Heather, you've been quietest longest, so I'm going to let you have the last two. I'm just checking in first, Romana, about the change management, because I do want to come back to the fact that we can talk about technology and we can talk about accessibility in particular. Do you think people in the room know where to go to find help around change management? I was just thinking about a call to action. It really does strike me that we've mentioned it a lot, that anybody who's learning about accessibility, they've got to learn about influence, they've got to learn about other stuff. But actually change management stuff that's in a book, it's about process, project management, and so on. Is there an obvious place to point people to say, if you haven't thought about this in terms of your personal development, here's a way to start thinking about making change happen?
I mean, you could put it in Google. Or you could ask Copilot. I'm trying to
You've been as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the skills people are probably doing naturally anyway.
Yeah.
So I would literally just think, Google, ways to influence people. There's so many TED Talks or YouTube. I could tell you some change management methodologies, but I do think if that's not your full-time job, I also don't want to overwhelm people with a whole other load of things that they have to do. But if I could sort of sum up what you do in change management, you do two things. Whenever you go and you start doing a change management project, you think I need to affect change. You split your stakeholders into people that I'm going to impact with this change and people that I need to influence. And so you're really clear on that. And then you say, what do I need them to do differently? And that gives you pretty much your stakeholder management plan and what you need to start thinking about. Yes. And if you just did that in the next year and thought about what are the key people that are going to help me influence this change, what do I need them to do? And similar with the people you're going to impact, you're already halfway there. Mm-hmm. So I was honest by saying I don't think it's rocket science. The bit that's difficult is it's with humans. And people are very complex and difficult, and there's all sorts of, there's lots of research around you can't use the same thing to motivate certain people. But, the deeper you want to get into that, I think it then turns into a bit of psychology actually as well. But I think the headline is just be really clear on the so what all the time. Mm-hmm. Don't tell people what you want to tell them. Tell people what they want to hear.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of the time we do the same sort of messages thinking, this is what I need to tell them. And we forget to just think about it from the audience's point of view. Mm-hmm. Like I'm sat here, I'm a procurement person, I do regs all the day, and then suddenly why are you talking to me? And I think we just need to get into that skill set a bit more to make it land with people.
A bit of empathy, in fact, probably.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So Heather, we worked, on planning out the day, and I guess we talked a little bit about leadership as a step on for some people in the network and the way that they're working. How would you describe the next step for the people that you see in the CAN network? And based around what we've learned today, what sorts of things do you think that you could be doing either yourself or within the network or individually that would show that change happening in your organisation?
I think I've heard it a few times today. A lot of people have said it, but it's the celebration of the good stuff that is happening. I think we're all in this together, and I think it's very easy to forget that we're actually doing really worthwhile work, even although it sometimes doesn't feel that we're actually getting ahead. So when there is something that you can celebrate, do it. I think a few people have mentioned it. Sarah mentioned it earlier as well. Just talk internally about that great stuff. We had an email from a blind user who said, oh my God, I can now book a flight on Skyscanner, thank you. And okay, it's only on your iOS app, but still, that's great. And we asked them to come into the office. We made a little video. We shared it at a town hall. It was such a celebratory moment. But, we could have just got that and gone, oh yeah, nice. And that would have been it. So I think, that was a big thing for us, but I think thinking about the little day-to-day things that actually make a difference, that we maybe don't even realise it. So I would stop and think about it, and we're doing some worthwhile stuff, just recognise that. And don't give yourself the hard time, I think, that we all do. Like, it's not happening fast enough, it's not good enough. We're trying our best, and it is making a difference. So believe in it and believe in yourselves to do it. And I think the support that the CAN network gives other people doing exactly the same thing with exactly the same challenges, lean into that, make the most of it. Our LinkedIn group is pretty quiet. People don't ask enough questions on there. They don't connect enough on there. Please do. We'll try and tag people who we think are the right people to chat to about stuff. But that's a community that's right there, ready for you, ready for your questions, ready for you to be able to connect with anyone you want to, which is phenomenal, really, when you think about it. It blows my mind.
2,000 people, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Actually, we hit just 2,000 at the House of Lords event on Tuesday.
I think I heard a small cheer in the corner.
All right, yeah. It was really nice.
It was like when you got Martha to sign up.
Yeah, that was it.
Great. Look, I've allowed myself to go over for the very first time because we were hearing some really great stories. Thank you so much to everybody in the audience for being here. Thank you to our panel for closing off and rounding up the day. And thank you to everybody, all the sponsors and others who've made this happen.
Well, good evening, everyone. Mark's just overrun, so I'm not going to delay you much longer from the reception. It's been a long day, but it really is an absolute pleasure to see everybody along at TechShare Pro. I think, interestingly, the way we've described it, TechShare, it's exactly what we do. We are sharing we are sharing our experience. We're learning a huge amount from organising this, and we are dependent on our sponsors to put this programme on. We are a relatively small UK charity. In case some of you don't know, we are a registered charity, and one of the purposes of charities in the UK to satisfy the Charity Commission is that we provide public benefit. Well, what is our public benefit? We've gone to a lot of thinking to try and put a value on that, and we've come up with a figure. We believe that we are able to deliver £2 million worth of public benefit to people in the UK. And I'm pleased to say, as of the end of October this year, we are nearly 90% achieved that total. We do that through our free services, where we have excellent volunteers, dedicated volunteers, prepared to answer queries over the telephone, to go into people's homes, help them with their technology. We provide webinars, we provide lots of online data sheets, which of course we have to keep up to date as technology moves on. And I think, so that's our little sort of ad and pat on the back for our charity. In terms of the programme that we've seen over the last few days this week, work goes on. Nothing changes. I've spent a career in information technology, as it's now called. It was data processing, I think, when I started, and it keeps changing. And I think the great thing as well, that the technology has changed and society has changed. We now recognise disabled people and their requirements. Big chunk of my lifetime, I was saying earlier, disabled people have either been patronised or totally ignored. Now, I hear today someone's telling me, and didn't quite justify it, they said, oh, do you know 1 in 5 people in the population is considered disabled? What a huge market. We can't afford to ignore that. I was pleased to say that yesterday that this was recognised, senior business leaders recognising the importance of accessibility to their business success. We need to reach out to people. Why are people excluded? They shouldn't be. Society broadly includes us all. And AbilityNet, we have committed ourselves to a digital world accessible to all. So the programme's been, I hope you enjoyed the reception, those that you were able to be there at the House of Lords, kindly organised by our patron, Baroness Martha Stewart. Lane Fox, sorry. Slip of the tongue there. It's Martha Stewart. Sorry then. Yeah, Baroness Martha Lane Fox. And then we got down to the serious business on Tuesday. Very kindly, the Chief Executive, Ian Stewart of HSBC, brought together senior business leaders, and again, as I said earlier, recognised their commitment to accessibility within their product. Great. And then we talked about brands, the importance of brands that address the whole community. Very, very important. And I was actually fascinated by the Downs video. In one way, I was encouraged that we're actually asking us, yes, you can do it. Why? Because you're disabled. You're not learning Shakespeare. We don't want to teach you. You can't make any benefit. You can't make a career. You can't get a job. You can't do this. You can't do... The whole message. I've worked with disabled charities before. I've been a trustee of another charity, and the times that people get involved and they say, "Hey, I can do this. I've just done this. What else can I do?" And that's really, really encouraging. So the message is on technology. It goes on and on. Heard a lot today about AI. This is going to be great. Well, we've heard of world-changing technologies. Maybe the reality isn't. They don't deliver quite what we expect at the start, but AI will make a huge difference. We have to take the population along with us. Inclusivity. Great thing about IT, it's moved, in my career from, the back office where we were the sort of high priest of the technology, the stuff buzzing away in an air-conditioned room. Well, we've still got that with great data centres up in the cloud, but the technology has become commoditized. It's improved lives. It's made a difference. It's made people can communicate with their relatives. My cousin's quite a bit older than me. He's got a daughter out in New Zealand. She has a baby instantly. He can see the young child. Well, years ago, it would have been several weeks later. A sort of black and white photograph would have arrived in the post, or maybe not, and maybe by the time that the child was going to school. But, this is a reality of technology. You get on video call, weekly, daily, whatever. It's all possible. Order your groceries. You're disabled. You can't get out to the shop. You can order your groceries. They're delivered. Well, we all know what is available, but we must make sure that as things develop, we take the disabled population along with us, and disability can occur as one gets older and older. People do become disabled with things like arthritis, loss of vision, visual impairment. So there is still a huge amount to do, and TechShare Pro will continue as long as we can afford and get the support to run it, because we learn from you, and we hope that we put together a program that you learn and you take back into your workplaces. So I won't say any more about the program. You've been on the program, you've seen it, don't need me to repeat what you've seen, but I do have to do some acknowledgements, some heartfelt thanks to our sponsors, in particular to HSBC, who've laid on the facilities here, great supporters of ours, but certainly to our sponsors, our gold sponsors, DQ, Google, Microsoft, and Before Media. Our silver sponsors are Barclays, Crawford Technologies, eBay, Meta, and Sony. And certainly our partners, CareScribe, long list, IAAP, all these people support us, Inclusive Africa, great to see their support, JDU, the Royal National Institute for the Deaf, Raise the Game, Scope, the Ad Association, ISBA, and UKIF. Apologies for having to read a list out, but I don't want to miss anybody. I think that's kind of social death if somebody doesn't get mentioned. But to thank all of you for your attendance. It really is. It's been great to meet new people and lots of our old friends that we've met over the years. So thank you for coming. We've enjoyed hosting it. I also have to thank our team within Ability for putting all this together. It's a lot of hard work. Get together some excellent panel members with great experience to share with us all. And of course, Attendable, who have supported, been kind of the back office organisers, and particularly must give acknowledgement to the BSL interpreters that have served us throughout the programme, and to those that I'm told they're called captioners. So we've made sure that somebody's waving. Are you the captioners? Very good. Well, thank you very much. It enables the whole programme to be as inclusive as we can get it. So thank you very much, once again, just to finish up, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. We do appreciate it. We will continue working hard to achieve the public benefit that we set up to do. And we look forward as well to working with our corporate clients in order to help them and to generate the funds that fund our free service. So thank you very much. Have a safe journey to wherever you've got to go to. But before that, there is drinks and refreshments laid on for you, and I look forward to meeting some of you there. So thank you again, and there we are.